Good morning and welcome to the Hobby Second Breakfast Show. In today's video, I'm going to be talking through a tournament I went to recently, the list I took, the lists I came up against, and how it all played out. Okay, so recently I went to a tournament in London. It was Duel of the Fates Kingdom Wargames. It was a 3-round tournament, 2.5 hours, and hard dice. I brought a rebel list, which you can see on the screen in front of you now. Basically, to run through the kind of ideas of this list, it's basically reliant on Leia and Wicket and their teamwork card, their 2-pip, generating a lot of dodges. And with Leia's new exemplar keyword, that basically means that you can create this kind of like aura effect around Leia that she can drop dodges and help out sort of the troopers, Luke, whoever around her. In terms of operatives, I brought Op Luke and IG. Feeling with Op Luke is, thanks to sort of recent force push nerf where it went up to 40 points, Luke's disengage and kind of his hitting power means that hopefully he has the flexibility to move around the battlefield and challenge objectives where he needs to. Similar with, well, not similar, but a similar idea with IG. He doesn't really need that much support. He kind of can sit at the back with his range 4, normally getting that pierce from his bounty programming and just sitting at the back, plinking off wounds. And if they did have an operative I could bounty, then sometimes suppression could be useful as well. In terms of the core options I ended up taking, thanks to the recent buffs, Rebel Core is now a lot stronger than it used to be. So I took one base unit with no upgrades. They're just an objective capper, so the double move with the 2 dodges onto an objective can be super useful in the late game. And then I took a couple of ion guns, one with a medical trooper and one with a trooper specialist. Again, the idea with these, it just gives you a bit more firepower at that range 3, which is where the rebels want to be shooting. And hopefully you can now do a fairly effective move-shoot combination because it gives you that dodge from the agile keyword as well. And the ion gun, as I'll come on to later on, is no joke either. 2 black and a white, critical 1, impact ion. It's all good. And like, particularly into a lot of the lists I ran into in this tournament, it was very effective. Fleet troopers, scattergun, extra trooper, again, just there mainly for their charge keyword. If Leia or IG gets stuck in melee, fleets can hopefully charge in, free them up before their action. With the fully kitted, which is, well, if all the unit is alive, which is a bit of a rarity with fleets, but if the unit's alive, it's throwing 10 white, 2 red, surging, pierce, like, it's a pretty good dice pool. I think it averages about 6 hits with pierce, which is not bad at all. Might be 5 hits, but I'll think about that in a second. And then special forces. I tried out a couple of different option special forces, some Mando resistance, things like that. Also, full squad of commandos, which I think has some legitimacy now, even though with the sniper nerf. But looking at these, I basically took double pathfinders, one with power, one with Bistan, and a unit of slingers. The slingers and the skirmishers, there for a couple of reasons. They're cheap objective cappers with low profile and 6 wounds. They also benefit from Wicket scouting party keywords, so they can really leap up early game and just be tagging onto those objectives to sort of force opponents to kind of commit into them into a relatively cheap unit. So that was kind of the basic idea of the list. In terms of command cards, I took Luke's 2 1-pips because they're both really strong. Son of Skywalker is great if you need to deal with a big force user or a big armored vehicle or something like that, and you serve your master well. Increasingly, I find myself, unfortunately, I ran into quite a few droids recently, but you can also adjust your serve your master well on unit fleets or a unit of pathfinders or something, like getting the fleets to move into that charge as well is pretty good, pretty effective, and getting an extra use out of them is super nice. 2 pips, took both the layers. A Beautiful Friendship is just the kind of what makes this list work. Generates so many dodges between Leia and Wicket. Like, it's very common for Leia to have 7 or 8 dodges at points throughout turns, and like that's super nice. It also means turn 1 by default she starts with 2 dodges on her, which is great for just defending against early plink damage. No Time for Sorrows is always great for just moving on to objectives, especially if, like I do sometimes, you just mismeasure a bit and don't want to pop burst of speed on Luke or something. You just want to move around the corner with No Time for Sorrows. You have to take IG's 3-pip, which is a shame because it sucks. I mean, maybe that's a hot take, but I think it's so rarely, especially when you need as much order control as you do now, having a 3-pip that doesn't immediately do anything very powerful. Well, it can do something powerful, but only some of the time. Just doesn't feel good, and I think IG would be stronger if you didn't have to take it. Unfortunately, in terms of other 3-pips, I was a bit stuck. I didn't want to put all my eggs in one Luke basket because he very often is diving in and sort of making the plays for this list. So I don't want him to tie all my command cards to him. So as good as his 2 3-pips, well, one of his 3-pips is, I did just end up going for Leia's Somebody Has to Save Our Skins. I think there's also an argument for Courageous Counterattack from Wicket, that 3-pip. As long as the 2 other Ewok units are alive, getting flat courage to go and tag those objectives is, again, super nice. Looking at my battle deck, I had Mark Target, Surface Scan, and Recon. These are basically the ones that kind of give me control over the units that have them, and like that's really important. So, for instance, here, if I'm marking my targets, I'm almost always going for the Pathfinders with POW and IG because they're sitting back and they're plinking, and especially in the case of the Pathfinders, it's a 76-point unit that shouldn't really be getting shot that much. So, sitting back is really nice with those. Similar to Surf Scan and Recon, Wicket will very often be the carrier for those because he's going to be out of my deployment zone and running around and will be at range 2 of their units. Yeah, so I think there's decent versatility there and always feels nice having control over those. In terms of the 3 greens, there was a clear skew at the tournament towards these 3 greens. I think they are the most consistent. There's arguments for like fortified positions and stuff like that, but I think Garrison, I don't understand why anyone would take Garrison right now, apart from in some very specific situations. But yeah, Advanced Intel for me is the best green in the game right now. Having that extra pass on the first turn just feels super nice. Cunning Deployment is fine, especially in this list because I have so much synergy with dodges. Like, it very often, like, it feels a bit greedy sometimes to proc it on Leia and Wicket again when they've already got a couple of dodges, but you can definitely do that. And just chucking it on like an IG or a Pathfinder unit turn 1 just to, again, minimize that potential plink damage is super nice. And then Ordnance is just good versatility. Like, it can do suppression and it can do cracking armor, which is kind of what's quite useful at the moment because there are vehicles around, and being able to suppress units, especially when there are some yellows that are tied to getting suppression, then that's super nice. In terms of my reds, I went for the ones that would allow me to kind of control, well, yeah, have the most like options in terms of range and things like that, because this is kind of a gunline list, but it has some quite powerful up close options. So Breakthrough, Shifting Priorities, and Recover, I think all just gave me a bit more time than perhaps some of the other ones where you do have to be pushing up a bit more, especially with like Shifting Priorities. Like, you can really kind of pull your opponent's army around if they go for those objectives early. And when I have the units I do that are happy to sit back on objectives, Shifting Priorities is a really nice option for this list. So let's talk about the games. There were 3 rounds, as I say. Spoilers, I didn't win all 3. But in the first round, I came up against a Vader, ATST, couple of Snows, a couple of bikes, pretty standard Empire list. I'll put it on screen for you now. The opponent was really nice and wasn't hugely experienced, but was really very nice to play against. And we were both kind of like still battling with a couple of new things in the rules. So yeah, that was all good. In terms of what we ended up with in terms of the cards, we both had Cunning for our green, and then we ended up on Shifting Priorities with Marked Targets. I chucked my Marked Targets on kind of the standard IG and POW, I think. Her Marked Targets there were a couple of Snows, and in hindsight would have gone on the bikes, but there was also a couple of basic Stormtroopers as well with some medics. And in this one, basically, it was a very aggressive start to the game. I think in a tournament, especially only 2.5 hours, and when especially I don't play super quickly sometimes, I think we're always going to be a little bit tight on time. So yeah, we basically both moved up very aggressively. Luke was actually down to 2 wounds on turn 2, which was not ideal. Fortunately, I was able to come in and medic him back up a bit, which was nice. But yeah, the ATST put some pressure on him. She moved out her bikes very aggressive, very early to try and sort of push me back a bit. But I did then have enough ranged firepower to kind of knock them down very quickly. IG's Pierce and Sharpshooter came in super helpful there, just for cutting through the bikes really quickly. And then yeah, the Ewoks just did their thing on the flanks and grabbed me some objectives. So yeah, it was a really good game. Ended up winning 9-1. And yeah, it was a good start to the list, and kind of the list did what I wanted it to in this game. Unfortunately, winning by a significant margin in round one kind of put me towards the top of the draw. And so in round two, I faced off against Lila Claire, who is one of the best players in the world. And she was running experimental droids with some pretty stacked units. In particular, there was a huge squad of B2s that I just didn't really have an answer to. So she had Super Tac, Super Tac Droid Kalani, B2s, B1s, and B1 shooting is actually a bit decent now. I got caught out by that a few times. People are bringing the sort of the red-white gun with critical, which is when you're getting a couple of surges with B1s, it's super nice. Yeah, then some commandos knocking around with swords, snipers, yeah, really nasty. And then droidicas, who are just so obnoxious right now, 60 points. Carving through those shields in 5 turns, and more often effectively 4 turns of shooting if you're lucky, is really challenging, and like always feels like so demoralizing when you chuck a bunch of dice and all you clip off are the shields, and then they regenerate one of the shields at the end of the turn. To add on to that, she also brought the Snail tank, which is an absolute terror right now. Like how strong it is and the arsenal and stuff, it feels super good at just shutting down areas of the board. But yeah, um, this game, I had a very different outlook to it. I was pretty certain I was going to lose, so all I was looking to do was try and squeeze as many points as I could from this game. Um, I mean, even from basically by the end of turn one after deployment, I was like, okay, I'm pretty much cooked here. She'd managed to isolate Luke. I don't know if you can see in this picture. I can't remember which picture I took, but she managed to isolate Luke on the right-hand side and then was able to just shoot him down. And I was stuck in an awful position where I was either going to dive and Luke would die, or I would just wait it out, hope to survive, and then kind of just pray to the dice gods. And while I did roll pretty hot in defense, I didn't roll hot enough, and Luke basically died without having done anything. So at that point, I was like, okay, shut up shop. Let's try and just get as many points as I can from the rest of the game. I just absolutely camped on the 2 left objectives. We were playing shifting mark targets. And yeah, I basically managed to snag 6 VPs, which was way more than I deserved from this. As you can see from the kill points, I'll put them up here now, but it was 666 for Lila and 60 for me. I literally killed 1 squad of droidicas. I think I killed like 2 B2s and 1 BX or something maybe. This was a rough game, and yeah, just got outplayed, and yeah, my list wasn't able to dig me out the hole, unfortunately. So that put me into the 1-1, and at this point, I think I was actually pretty much bang average in the middle of the tournament rankings, which was nice. And like, I don't know, as a kind of being 1-1 going into the final game takes a lot of the pressure off, because you're not going to win, you're not going to lose, you're just going to be hovering somewhere around the middle. And yeah, I was up against a guy called Michael Peters, who also a really good player, did I think really well at MKGT, came like top 30 or something, and he was also running droids. His list was not as initially terrifying as Lila's, but had some really nice tricks to it. So he had Super Tac, Dooku, Asajj, some nice big B2 squads, some B1 battle droids with the E5, which is the upgrade critical 1-1, and then the standard 3 units of droidicas, because 180 points for all that stuff and all that suppression is really good. And yeah, this was a very different kind of game. I was very aware of a lot of the power in his list was focused in Dooku and in Asajj. And they were both with burst of speed in this one, which was pretty scary. And like, I was just trying to make sure that when the dive came, was then able to move out of the way for the following turn, because they're both obviously down to speed 1. And yeah, this one was much closer than either my first game or my second game. And I think while it could have gone either way, I think I was kind of always on the back foot a bit in this one, and was able to get a few kind of nice moves off later in the game. But yeah, essentially B2s are super scary, hit really hard. Luke did some really good work for me here. Like, he was able to, I think he actually did all the wounds to Asajj, and then also was able to wipe out a fairly chunky B2 squad with his Son of Skywalker card. And yeah, he like Luke just made a lot of plays for me here. I think at one point I was like 4 or 5 VPs down, and then brought it back a bit. But unfortunately, in the end, I kind of ran out of steam a bit. We were playing recover and sweep, which I think I misplayed sweep a bit. I probably should have gone a bit more aggressive because he was able to kind of move his units out of his friendly territory, which took away that big 2 point swing which I was looking for. But yeah, and him having advanced turn one, which was also quite a big deal as well. I ended up losing this 13-9, but I think there were some good moments in this one. It was a very typical 1-on-1 game three, being quite a long day game. The dice were just all over the place. There were some really chaotic rolls. I think I shot Pathfinders at Dooku twice and hit him 3 times with a 20-something white dice and a couple of black, which was just pretty spectacular. But then Dooku did eventually fall to a 2 dice hit from Leia, where he failed both of his defense dice. So swings and roundabouts. In the end, I'm not actually fully sure I came. It was in the bottom half, just I think, yeah, 10th out of 14, and the other Rebel players were 7th and 9th, so nicely occupying that kind of middle territory. But yeah, I had a really good time. Played some really nice people, really good vibes at the event. Yeah, I think final thing I'll talk about is quick tier list because I really like a tier list. And starting off at, should we start at the top or the bottom? Let's start off at the bottom. The Power Squad of Pathfinders, it doesn't do enough, and not having critical or surge to crit is quite problematic with the way cover is now. Essentially, crits are really nice because they reduce the number of cover rolls your opponent is getting, and the average number of hits from a power attack at range 3, I think, is about 4 or 5, and essentially you're hoping for maybe 1 crit on those. The difference is compared to the Bistan squad is that because Bistan has critical 1, you're normally pushing 2 crits, which basically gives you another guaranteed hit through at the same range. Add to the fact that Bistan throws extra dice, and he has impact and ion on his gun. It just makes him so much more versatile. And while he has a bit more points, I think he's 13 more points, I think it's well worth it. And the Inspire one is nice, but the problem is often, with the way I'm using Pathfinders at least, they're not actually that close to the rest of my army to get it off. So while it is a nice ability, it's not quite as impactful as the Bistan squad. Moving up to the next tier, this is into average now. Again, this may be a bit generous because it's Rebels. In fact, they should probably all be 1 tier down, essentially. But yeah, essentially the Ewok skirmishers, the melee ones, are fine. They are just a little bit expensive for what they do, and because they don't innately have charge when, fleets do, for instance, it does mean that they become like a 45-point squad. And they don't surge, they throw white non-surging defense die. Like, they are just a very glass cannony squad. And the fact they're only courage 1, and yeah, it's all right though. Like, they're fine in this list because they get the scout 2 and because they have low profile. And what that lets you do is it very often lets you push up into heavy cover. And very often with that low profile, it's going to take 2, maybe 3 shots, unless they're firing, a massive squad of B1s with B2s with blast or whatever, to actually kill them. And that's super frustrating because if you can rob a couple of actions from an opponent with a 40-point squad, I feel that's a really good thing. Fleets. Fleets are fine. The problem with fleets is everything they do is telegraphed. There is only one thing they're really going to be trying to do. Well, at least the way I play them. Maybe there are other ways, but essentially with fleets, you kind of know they're going to be pushing up towards you. You kind of know they're going to be hiding behind line of sight and then popping out, and that makes them very predictable. And it means that against good players, they can very often nullify you. And in order to keep them safe, you're very often having to leave them so far back, it feels like they maybe only actually get 1 or 2 opportunities to do what they're best at. So in the right game, in the right situation, they're really good and really enjoyable to use. And them having charge is a really nice change. I think it does make a difference. But they definitely aren't super strong, but they do have their cases, definitely. And for hanging around and for keeping a sort of for keeping squads off your heroes, as it were, who don't want to be in melee, I think they're pretty useful. Rebel Troopers. I am increasingly a fan of the new Rebel Troopers. Agile 1 should not be underestimated on a unit that rolls crap defense die and has nimble. Because what it does is it means you're no longer having to do the old rebel staple, which was move dodge or shoot dodge. It now means you can move and shoot, which is exactly what you want to be doing in the current version of the rules. Like, it is very, very rare that in a turn a unit is not going to have to move. Because, like, shifting priorities, for instance, or just actually getting to the objectives in the first place, being able to move and shoot, and also get a dodge to start your nimble is really strong, and it does give you a feeling of more solidity. It also means, and with the changes to the rebel officer and to Leia, that if you are able to exemplar a dodge over to them before they've even acted, it means their nimble is ready to go, and that's a really nice bit of synergy there that can definitely keep them going longer than you'd expect. Add to that the fact that their heavy weapons are a bit better now. I'm a big fan of the ion gun. The ion gun is great against droidicas, which I think you're going to see a lot of at the moment. It's solid against droids just because it robs actions, and like robbing an action from a big B2 squad. When I was playing against Lila, she was very much the opinion like she didn't really mind if she lost a trooper, but if you lose an action from, a big B2 squad, which can be 170, 180 points, that's a huge deal. And if, a 60, 70 point rebel squad is taking that away from them, that's a really good use of that ability. So yeah, they are still rolling white defense die and they still don't surge offensively, so don't expect a huge amount of staying power from them, but they now are definitely better than they were before and definitely have more use cases. They no longer feel like attacks, which is what they felt like before. Moving on to the next tier, which is solid. The Bistan squad, kind of talked about them earlier, but again, they have Ion, and don't underestimate Ion because also it knocks shields off droidicas, and that feels so good. Instead of having to throw, 4 hits at them, if you shoot them twice with Ion, you've kind of already got through most of their shields with just those 2 shots. And then actually you can start to push meaningful wounds to onto droidicas quite quickly. And once you're through those shields, they do kind of melt very quickly. So yeah, super nice. The other thing with Bistan is because you're just inherently throwing more dice, even though they're of a lower quality, you are going to see more crits. And crits, when he has impact, he has ion, he has critical, is just really nice for shooting vehicles or shooting through cover and things like that. Range 4. So big fan of Bistan, and his weapon not needing a recover anymore is such a huge change. And yeah, feels a lot stronger than it did before. Leia's a really interesting one. She exemplar is a game changer, and like I really wish there was a more efficient way to get aims on her, but I just can't think of a way to do it right now. But exemplaring dodges, the way I kind of think of it now is that she's almost giving like old light cover in a sort of range 2 bubble, and like that's really effective because in the way, at least the way this list kind of works, she's always going to have a dodge on her, and like that just gives you such a feeling of confidence of just like being able to drop a dodge here, drop a dodge here. There's a unit of pathfinders in range, you can just drop a dodge on them and things like that. This is the unit of skirmishers. That I think, sorry, slingers. I think they're just better than the skirmishers. They pack a punch at range 2 and they get independent surge, and that surge token, like, it's so good for just keeping that one annoying ewok alive, or pushing through 4 hits rather than 3 into a unit and things like that, like those break points that you just want to get through. And yeah, I think they serve a real purpose in this list, and while they're not powerful in their own right, they are so good at just like sitting on objective for a couple of turns with their low profile, forcing an opponent to commit a unit to come and deal with them, because it's rare that an opponent is going to have a unit cheaper than this to come and deal with them effectively. They were also able to, like if they do send a cheap unit, like some probe droids or whatever, if they're running more, they are able to sweep up those as well. IG. I'm a really big fan of IG, but I think I may be being slightly generous here, and I may actually drop him down to average. He is 110 points the way around him with Recon and Bounty. Recon mainly just because it gives him a bit more flexibility. Basically, the way I want to use IG is I always want him to be shooting. So he wants to come onto the board as late as possible turn 1, and then after that he's kind of like order neutral. He doesn't really care because he's such long range. Like, just keep him back fairly defensively. And with his sharpshooter and the way cover works now, while at range 4 with black, white surging, you're only averaging, I think it is just under 2 hits. like even if you're pushing one PS1 against like, you know, B1s or whatever, like, or B2s, like just being able to consistently remove models from long distance when they can't really return fire, because a lot of stuff's range 2 and sometimes range 3 now. It does just give you that kind of advantage and lets you kind of control how IG does. He's also great for, as I said earlier, like mark target, surface scan, whatever, like just for sitting back, plinking off some wounds, and you don't particularly care about when during the turn that he goes. So yeah, I really like IG. The only reservation I have is that you have to take his 3-pip, and that at 110 he is a little bit pricey. I think um, there's definitely an argument for spending an extra 40 points and putting like Bad Batch or something in, although obviously it don't fulfill the same role, but Bad Batch perhaps offers more outright power. Wicket is for me one of the best value points wise heroes in, definitely in Rebels, possibly in the whole game, maybe. Like he's 77 points here for me, situational awareness, forest dwellers, which means because generally I start the game with Leia and Wicket's 2-pip, and because Leia doesn't have Underworld or doesn't go to Wicket, so essentially Wicket starts the game with 2-pips, one from Forest Dwellers, one from his independent dodge, which means Leia starts with 2. And that means as soon as you're moving on with Leia, you can exemplar those dodges. And it means with Wicket, because he's dodging crits and because he has nimble, and especially if he's in cover and he has low profile, like he is actually so resilient. And while he is only courage 2, generally you're going to have Leia near him, so you've got that inspire to grab it off him. And if they're throwing, you know, enough suppression at him to panic him, which, you know, has to be 4+ suppression, then you kind of won anyway, because they're dumping so much attacks into this 70-point hero, and he's great. He's also so frustrating for Force users to deal with, because generally, what I at least try and do is try and load him up with dodges from Leia, you know, try and get 3+ dodges on him, then send him at Dooku, send him at a big hero. And then if they swing at him, even if, you know, like Vader is only averaging without his surges like 4 or 5 hits, so they're not going to kill Wicket. Like they're probably going to do, you know, 2 or 3 PS3 max. And then what do? They can't then withdraw, so they're stuck in combat with Wicket. And increasingly, people aren't bringing force push. So like they are, either they withdraw to go and try and do something else, at which point I guess you've kind of won, right? Because you've robbed an entire action from a big force user. So yeah, big fan of Wicket. Don't expect him to kill a lot of stuff. Just expect him to be annoying. Some people run tenacity on him. I personally don't really. I mean, maybe, but that's a 6-point upgrade, which I think you can kind of do without. And I think just having him annoying, and that red black PS1 attack, like often that's 3 PS1, and often chucking that, you know, some clones or some B2s or something, actually feels pretty good. So yeah, big fan of Wicket. Um, Op Luke, he's still really, really good. And I think the net change to Force users, but the Force push increase benefited him the most because of his disengage. Not that that's news to anybody. I think there are still definitely heroes in the game that could use Force push. I think Vader has to have Force push, for instance. But Op Luke, I don't really know. Like I'm debating putting Force Push on him, but with the kit I had him on, had him with this tournament, felt pretty good. Burst of speed, guidance, and mind trick. Mind trick's great. Unfortunately, I ran into 2 droid lists and a Vader list, so yeah, is what it is. And yeah, that wasn't ideal, but I think it still has a place, and being able to suppress or panic a unit so it can't tag an objective is still really powerful. And yeah, I ran it with tenacity. Again, super nice. Like when you have that tenacity dice for that Son of Skywalker turn, you feel like so powerful, because I think it averages like 5+ hits on a swing. And you're doing that twice, so very often, you know, you're putting through like 10, 11 hits, PS4, Impact 4, Surge to crit. Like it killed an ATST, it killed Ventress, it killed a big squad of B2s. Like it does work. And the game I lost was the game where Luke didn't do anything, and I think that says a lot. Like it is a lot of eggs in one basket, and increasingly in the game it's harder to keep heroes like that alive, just because there are units that have so much firepower now with those bigger squads. But Luke with the deflect change now so that you don't need the dodge to spend and things like that. He does feel really good. And having access to the command card he does, like I think his 1-pips are some of the best out there right now, and like people have to respect him, especially with burster speed, because the ground he can cover and the threat he presents. And it's so hard to time down. Like you have to send 2 squads into him to tie him down, and then he can just kill one normally and then run away. And that's really strong. So as a playmaker, not as an outright damage dealer, I'd say like don't look for him to like carve up your opponent's whole army by himself. But if you want someone to run around, be threatening, and control areas of the board, I think Luke's really useful for that. So yeah, that's my report of the tournament. I probably should have said went 1 and 2, came 10th out of 14, had a really good time. I think there are definitely changes I would make to the list, but I just the Leia Wicket synergy was one of the first army lists I ran, and I'm still a really big fan of it. It feels really good, and like especially now you can exemplar those dodges, it feels even better. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.